Welcome to Shop Talk Live episode number 313. I am Ben Strano.
And I'm Amanda Russell.
Amanda, what do you have for us today?
This is a really good episode. I got to talk with Owen Madden, who is one of our ambassadors, and Evan Court, who I shot an article with him last year, painting furniture like a pro. Mm-hmm. But today we were talking to them about working in a production shop, which is a little different.
It's a little off-brand for us, but I like it.
I loved it. It was really interesting. It's a very different approach to woodworking, and we got some really good questions in. Yeah, there's a lot of good questions, and there was a lot of good conversation. I had already listened to it, and there's two things that stood out for me going forward for the audience, just like a little backstory, is first off, Evan... I've always thought of Evan as like a one-off furniture maker, like the person who sits there for hours and hours working on a detail that like 4% of people would notice. Mm-hmm. But recently he started doing some production work, and I loved his perspective on this. And, but only knowing him as a furniture maker, it was super interesting to hear him talk about production work. And then Owen is just, up at Rowan Woodworks. They've got such a cool thing going on. And Owen did a fantastic Instagram takeover for us. That was a highlight for me. So absolutely, I love hearing everything Owen has to say. Very, very, very cool conversation. And Owen's going to be at Fine Woodworking New England. Yes. He's going to be there presenting with one of our sponsors, Shaper Origin, and we'll be there, and a whole bunch of contributors, people from the magazine that everyone knows and love, will be at Fine Woodworking New England. So if you are not doing anything that weekend, April 26th and 27th, head on up, say hello. I'm going to be holed away in a back room live streaming a whole bunch of stuff, but Amanda will be probably more available to say hello to. Yeah, when I'm not busy, but definitely. Yeah. It'll be good. It's definitely a heavy work weekend for us, but we're really looking forward to it. But more importantly, I'm looking forward to presenting this episode to everyone. So take it away, Amanda. All right. Thank you guys for joining me. We wanted to have you both on this week to talk to you about life in a production shop as furniture makers and your approach and the way you handle production work, but maintaining your own work within that. So to get started, since we've never had either of you on the podcast, would you like to introduce yourselves? I guess we'll start with Owen.
Sure. Yeah. My name is Owen Madden. I am a cabinet maker in upstate New York. I work at Rowan Woodwork. I've been in production shops for maybe about 8 or 9 years as of recently, and then did some site work and in and out of shops for a while before then. But yeah, since basically out of high school, I've been in shops and on site.
And Evan, you have a little bit of a different background.
Yeah, kind of similar, kind of different. So I'm Evan Court. I'm a furniture maker in Dallas, Texas right now. I'm originally from the Northeast, like Boston, New Hampshire area. I went to North Bennett Street School, and I graduated from there in 2014. And I've been generally around production woodworking since then. I've made furniture probably equally as full-time. But a lot of the stuff I've done has been architectural millwork and cabinets and things. So what you would consider production woodworking, and even some of the furniture projects I've done, you could consider production just because of the type of clientele and so forth. And now currently, I still keep my furniture practice, which is still relatively full time. And then I also manage a commercial woodworking business, but we're more so even industrial design and fabrication, basically, because we deal with some materials that aren't even wood with similar tools.
Great. And Owen, you
I saw you this past weekend at a woodworking show, and you were mentioning you tried to maintain like projects outside of work as well, right? When you can.
Oh yeah, it's kind of the relaxation of it all is staring at architectural drawings and blueprints, and then just free forming a random design of something on the weekends or at night is really fun. Or even just taking a shaving on a hand plane. Sure,
yeah, and I know, having both of you on for that perspective specifically was important, because you're kind of diving into both worlds, not just the production, but also approaching furniture making traditionally, I guess I would say. I guess we can go ahead and dive into some of these questions we have. We got a lot of good questions from our Discord page, which is, to our listeners, we have a Discord page for for Shop Talk Live and just different channels, finishing, luthier work. So for those interested in maybe joining that, a lot of these questions came from there. But the first one actually came from a current North Bennett student, so I thought this would be perfect for Evan. And his name's Matthew, and he asks, how much of your woodworking today is influenced by what you may have learned in school or classes that you've taken? And would you say you're relying mostly on the fundamentals still, or have you developed your own habits and techniques that might differ greatly from what you originally learned?
Very cool that you're at North Bennett Street, Matthew. School totally changed my life. I hope it changes yours in a similar way. Every single thing I do every day, whether it's at my job or whether it's in my shop, all of it is totally connected to the fundamentals we learned at school. I don't think you can come up with your own way to do those things because there's no gimmicks that we learn there. We're learning how to actually do the thing, best practices. So there's nothing I could come up with on my own that would kind of be better than those methods. So all of it. I mean, Owen earlier mentioned looking at architectural drawings and blueprints. I mean, a lot of people look at how we draw and draft at school and think that that's kind of romantic. It's not. You're learning how to do that. You're learning how to associate hand, eye, and mind in a way that still applies even when you're doing it on computer or looking at CAD drawings and so forth. Same applies in the shop, the way we think about the machines, the way you think about things being square and best practices there. It's all connected to what we learned at school. So don't take any of that for granted, even in terms of learning about how to work efficiently and keep your bench space clean so that you can work more efficiently and get better results. All of that still matters.
Oh, so that was a part of the program, was like maintaining clean bench space and.
Not explicitly, Amanda. I mean, I had classmates who didn't keep a tidy workspace. I mean, at times I didn't. But I mean, as you get into more elaborate projects, you have a small space there. So the amount of parts that you have around you grows. This type of tooling that you have to take in grows. All of that gets more intense. So you kind of by default have to learn how to manage your own personal space. And if you pay attention to that and are aware of that, that can stay with you after you graduate, and you can take that with you into the field.
That's like a dream scenario. That school seems so amazing. I kind of had a more scattershot version of learning everything. Kind of like odd apprenticeship programs. I got started in historic restoration work in Albany, New York, with a pretty small shop. It was like 2 people. We did a lot of like cornice work, so a lot of reproduction mill work, crown moldings and big dental work and stuff like that. So I got to learn a few things from them, but mostly it was a lot of reading and trying to figure out things myself and figuring out, what joint is that they cut? Because I can, I'll cross section it and see and be like, what? How did they do that? How did they cut that profile? So you kind of go back, and there's a great old doors and windows book. I think I don't remember the author, but full diagrams of exploded doors and windows and how they used to build over the different generations. And that was a huge help. And then same kind of goes for everything else. I came up and just learned from the people above me and took in as much as I could. But yeah, I think because I don't have that training, it's definitely like I use like a building block kind of, like I don't have exactly maybe the exact fundamentals, but I learned a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and I can combine those and find a better practice for myself, along with doing as much research as possible.
Yeah. It does seem like there's a lot of resources for that kind of work. But yeah, I was curious if a lot of it was self-taught, how you approach your work.
Yeah, I don't want to say self-taught so much, self-motivated maybe, to ask the people around me or to have somebody kind of give me a hand. Like when I found out, I was mind blown when I found out you could like dissolve joints. And it's like, oh my God, I can keep it intact without breaking it apart because they used hide glue.
Oh, right.
And it was like, oh, this is fantastic. I can now take it apart and see exactly how they cut it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So definitely a lot of informal apprenticeship. I don't think the United States has quite the same apprenticeship programs as most places, but schools kind of fill that gap a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Let's dive into the next question. That was answered really well. This is always something that gets brought up often, but I think specifically to what you guys are doing, the approach would probably be a little different. This question comes from John, and he asks, how do you handle getting sharp where time is money? Yeah.
It's a great question.
You want me to answer? Owen? Yeah, Owen can answer first.
Yeah. It's hard to say because I think there's always there's a line, and it's mostly for yourself. I usually sharpen in my own time. I enjoy it. It kind of, usually I'll do it before or after work. It's a little bit of Andrew Hunter has taught me to kind of zen out and enjoy the process a little bit more than I used to, just kind of struggle to get back to the work piece. But if I'm doing something like on a piece of cabinetry, I'm going to say it's plywood. I'm going to go to the Tormek. I'm going to hit it really fast, and I'm going to polish really fast, and I'm going to go right back to dulling it on plywood.
I like how, well, this weekend you mentioned like using a Lee Nielsen on plywood, and I mean,
yeah,
it hurts, but it's the right tool for the job. And
yep.
Yeah. So yeah, that makes total sense. How about you, Evan? What's your approach when it comes to
I'm going to answer this two ways, because I can't tell if John's being like literal, like actually keeping sharp, or if he just means like keeping sharp, like staying on top of it. I guess I kind of agree with Owen. I don't know. Like sometimes I don't care. Like I CNC'd a bunch of MDF stuff last week and had to square inside corners. Like it's relative, right? Like don't do more work than you need to do the thing you need to do and have the result be right. Mm-hmm. I picked the sharpest chisel I had basically to avoid having to actually sharpen anything. And by the time I was done, it was dull and I didn't care. And I moved on to the next thing. So I guess it's just kind of being aware of like where things are at and what time you have and what the situation is. If that question's not so literal, how do you stay sharp when time is money? And sharp means kind of staying engaged with the project to make sure the quality stays high. I think the answer, I guess, is still kind of the same, but how you look at it is broader, right? So still understanding like where you can go faster and where you need to slow down. So in other words, like say your rough milling parts and thickness doesn't matter yet, and surface quality doesn't matter yet. Get it over with. So maybe at that point, you don't even necessarily label grain direction on your boards. You just kind of need to surface them so that they can acclimate again, and you can go quicker there. And then next time you need to accolade a little bit more time to kind of label things and be more careful. Mm-hmm. So I guess it's just always with literal sharpening or figuratively staying sharp, like just kind of knowing where you're at in the process and knowing where you can speed up and knowing where you need to slow down and focus a little bit harder.
Yeah, I found so I was working in Phil Morley's shop making furniture, and then I jumped into cabinet making, and that was the hardest adjustment for me, is when is it good enough, and where to find that line, and what, while being efficient. Going from fine furniture where the tolerances are so high to if the reveal on this door looks good, it's good. Don't worry about how close you are to that being accurate to certain thousandths of an inch or whatever.
Right.
So it's
your cat just made me feel comforted, by the way, because Shop Cat was over here screaming at me a second ago. I was like, oh, don't do this right now. So now I don't feel as left out anymore.
He's blurred out, but he's been now sitting on my shoulder every time I'm in a Zoom meeting. So for people watching this on YouTube, it's a cat. Yeah. That's great. So the next question is from Aaron, and it's kind of tied to what we were just talking about, but how do you stay focused in the monotony of repetition? So safety obviously is a big part of doing things over and over. It's easy to get into a flow. Oh, and you posted something about this recently, right? You enjoy repetitive work?
I do, yeah.
I do too.
I do enjoy it. I think it's something that is good practice. If you practice good techniques of, the 3-inch rule, and, never get your hands 3 inches close, no less than 3 inches away from the cutter. But there's so many rules that will keep you safe. Tuck your shirt in, don't use gloves, tie your hoodie strings up, all those things that if you can get in the practice of before you even walk to the tool, getting those out of the way, then the actual monotony part doesn't get too unsafe. The thing I think that's easy to struggle with is to forget where you are. Not literally, I know I'm in the shop, but to forget, this stack is going to stay at an inch. This stack is going to go down to, 7/8, and being really organized and mindful before you even walk up to doing anything that's going to be repetitive, taking all the room for error. I used to, I did architectural windows and doors for a long time, and I would have, carts and carts, probably 300-400 board feet of carts of parts that I would be running over the joiner. Weeks of just 2 square edges and then run through the molder and then run through the sander. But it can be really hard to try to stay on top of it. Stepping away, taking a walk, taking a stretch. I don't know, but there is a Zen state of doing it to where you get in that complete rhythm, and it feels really nice, kind of like a runner's high almost.
Mm-hmm.
I agree with Owen quite a bit, and I think he's super. It's nice that he brings up the safety aspect of it, because I think the repetitive tasks are the most dangerous and honestly the hardest, or at least for me, the hardest. And it's because it's so, he brings up a good point too about taking breaks and things and not losing track of where you are, because it's so easy to just kind of let your mind slip. I mean, you're literally doing the same motions potentially over and over and over again. My mind wanders. I start thinking about the furniture I'm making and not even necessarily the task at hand sometimes. And that can be very dangerous. I mean, even if you know the machine very well, still, I mean, it only takes one moment. And staying engaged to be safe and know where you are and know where the process is over 8 hours of the same repetitive task potentially. That's exhausting. That's arguably more tiring to be able to stay engaged on one thing that long than it is to spend the entire day doing some very hard niche woodworking task. I find it infinitely more difficult than what some people would consider maybe the hardest furniture making. It's harder to me. No, I agree with Owen. I think it's just kind of pacing yourself, maybe taking a break when you need. I mean, I've been CNCing stuff here for the last week straight, basically the same parts, and will be for maybe into April, almost till the end of it. And it's like he's saying, like, take a walk, go outside for 5 minutes. The 5 minutes outside or the bathroom break in the long run is better than the 4 hours down if somebody gets hurt or if the parts get messed up and that has to get redone. It's more valuable.
Yeah. I found, again, working in a shop where I had a week where I was doing shops on veneer, I would kind of schedule in the middle of the day, like, oh, I'm going to make this jig, like take the time to make this jig in the middle of the day. So it kind of breaks that process up a little bit.
Yeah.
But yeah, taking breaks is super essential to that. And, yeah, I agree with you, Evan. Like, I think that's where things can get really dangerous is the absent-mindedness of like, oh, I'm doing this 1,000 times. So what could go wrong?
Mm-hmm.
And you kind of enter this like, Zen state, but also, you're not as like engaged with what you're doing.
Right. I don't know if you agree with this, Owen, because I know you guys have robots and whatnot at your shop as well. And like, I worked with Matt Wada and I worked together for a while doing architectural millwork, and I would be at the saw and he would be at the saw for hours just cutting the same parts. And it's funny, the difference I feel like between things like the CNC or the edge bander or things versus what we would, I guess, consider traditional machines. They're all traditional, but it's like when you're on the table saw for hours, you're still having to do a little bit more of an action as an operator. You're still maybe more aware of the dangers of it. And I feel like when I'm at the CNC for hours on end, the machine is honestly doing a lot of the work. I mean, you have to load it and kind of babysit it a little bit, but it's way easier at that point to kind of get a little bit more tired, just kind of get a little bit, not, I guess, lazy about it, honestly. And that's even kind of more dangerous because then there's kind of other factors that creep in that you might not have just standing at the table saw the planer where you're a little bit more engaged. So it's interesting to see like kind of how the more modern the shop gets, potentially how even a little bit more dangerous the monotony can get.
Yeah, Evan, I was going to ask you the same exact question of how you deal with standing in front of a machine that, I know on my end, what I'm cutting now, MDF or plywood we use a vertical CNC. It's no different, but, and you basically press play, you start your program and then you let it go. But you still have to stay somewhat aware. It's maybe not as aware as holding the part, but I was going to ask how you kind of deal with that time. Our run times are short because we run individual parts. So it's like 2-3 minutes, but I imagine running like a full sheet of MDF, cutting out parts, that could be 15, the programs could be pretty long. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, I think what we're cutting right now, it's honestly, and this is what I was saying earlier, is it's not even a wood product. It's basically the like Pink Panther foam insulation board. And the program runs for about 15 minutes from front to back. So it's a long time, honestly. It seems like not that much, but it's a minute. And the way I try to structure it, like for myself, is to like make sure I have little tasks in between pressing play and the program ending. Like I have a little like cleaning routine I'll do while the sheet is cutting, and then like organizing the parts that previously came off. But even that's like kind of fraught, right? Because I'm still doing the exact same thing every single time while the program is running. So I guess I don't really have a good answer for you. Like by the end of 8 hours, like you start to go a little crazy and you need to, it's better to kind of cut it off than it is to go overboard, I guess, at that point.
We'd be in a spot, I ran a larger CNC than the one that we had prior, and we ran a ton of large profiles for windows and doors through solid wood. So there was always like a hyper vigilance with your hand on the dial, like kind of ready. If it hits a squirrely knot, it might do something. So you're always kind of watching it, but you're not actually doing anything. And that was almost more exciting. Like at least you felt like you were doing something. Now it feels like it's almost out of my hands, but I guess it's a trade-off. But yeah, the stuff in front of the table saw or those traditional cutting ones, your mind is working because you're still staring at that blade going, this will cut me, this will cut me, this will cut me.
Right.
Yeah. I don't know. Did we answer
that answer the original question? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think I wanted to get into the CNC thing. So I think so. Yeah. I think we can jump into the next question. I have a couple questions from John, another John. I thought these were really good. What are the trade-offs, if any, between production needs, throughput, price point, and quality or craftsmanship? Along these same lines, is production work mundane? How much work in a production cabinet or furniture shop is serial production versus problem solving? So a little bit of a long question, but
that's like three parts, right? What's the first part?
The first part are the trade-offs between quality and production, if there are any.
Well, there shouldn't be, right? I mean, if it's not a good quality, I don't really want to participate in it. So I guess, I mean, some people might have a different answer, but my answer is I don't want to make bad work. You know, this is my life. If the work is bad to meet a price point, then that's not the client for us. Yeah.
And you two are doing high-end work, which is, there is no really trade-off on that.
There's no trade-off. I think it's just a scale to adjust the price point. You just kind of maybe work with less desirable materials, but the work doesn't change. And I think the trade-off between like traditional craftsmanship and production work is really just the processes that you're setting up, because you're going to be doing it over and over and over again. If you set up a good process, then you can streamline, making the thing, and then you can lower your price point a little bit. You're not redesigning it every single time. Mm-hmm. That's the only difference I really see. Or there shouldn't be a drop in craftsmanship.
Yeah.
But there definitely is.
And I agree with your point too, Owen, about that's really keen about changing materials and lowering material costs still doesn't change the work. Like you could go buy $20 plywood or $100 plywood and you still have to cut it the same. That's a really good point.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we wouldn't be able to live with ourselves if we didn't make it look good, I don't think.
Yeah, for sure. This is kind of the second part to this question kind of sounds sad, but I don't think it's intended to be. Along these same lines, is production work mundane? Which we've kind of gone over, but it doesn't sound like it. It doesn't have to be. And this is also coming from a furniture maker. So this is why to have you guys' perspective is important too.
I want to hear what Owen's answer is. I want to see if he has
I don't think mundane is the word. I do always kind of joke about another rectangle goes out the door, there goes another rectangle. It can be a little bit like that, but when you realize, I'm going to get a little sentimental on it, but when you realize like what you're building and who you're building it for, we don't do a ton of commercial work. It's usually some homeowner, and they are going to love this. And even if they don't notice that they love it, they're going to love being in their kitchen and talking to their family and cooking meals and doing all those things. So if you look past the mundaneness of just making rectangles, and that's my sentimental side, but it's fun. You get to woodwork all day and create new processes and try to streamline your work and problem solve, which I know is part 3. But yeah, I don't think it's mundane, but it can get repetitive.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's a better word for it.
This is actually a great comparison because I'm realizing right now, we don't deal with the same clientele that Owen's shop does. So we deal with way more like corporate business types that are in this area and a little bit outside. And then artists who are still, I guess that's closer to what you'd consider a residential client, but they're still operating as a business. So the interaction can be different. And that work is very mundane, but I guess it doesn't, if you want to call it mundane, but I guess I don't feel that way. And I guess our answers are similar though, because I get some enjoyment out of using equipment and going through processes that I would never really do in my furniture making practice. So I get enjoyment, and it kind of cuts out the mundane aspect of it by feeling like I'm keeping up with what's current in my trade. because of the projects we're taking on and what we're doing, I have to stay up to date on what tech is out there, how those things are working, if there's a better program to use, if there's better cutters, like so on and so forth. So I guess I get personal enjoyment out of the environment and the process and where the trade is at. And that kind of, because a lot of times the projects that we're taking on are mundane, but how I'm going through them kind of satisfies me, I guess.
Yeah. And that's the point, right?
Awesome answer.
It was really good. I think you both are kind of coming to the same conclusion, is like you do enjoy it. So mundane comes from not really being engaged or not really having an interest in it to begin with. And I really liked your answer, Evan, finding like it's not about what you're making, but the process of making it makes it exciting.
Yeah. And it's weird too, because like even the term production woodworking I struggle with, because I mean, like woodworking not being a production trade that's like an infantile concept, right? Like woodworking is a hobby. That's like a post-war like tool company thing that we now have, right? And that's not to say there's anything wrong with that. I have wonderful friends who are hobbyist woodworkers, and I want them to do that. You know, it inspires me. Like John, I know you're listening to this. Like when he texts me, this friend, and like shows me what he's working on, that's like awesome, right? But woodworking's always been production. I mean, even you guys had the takeover, what was it, a couple weeks ago, and like there was like showing a period wood shop, like a preserved period wood shop. That was not a romantic thing in the period, you know, that was production woodworking. Those people were working to feed their families, not because it was cute. So that's like, to me, I mean, when I consider myself, honestly, at this point, a preservationist kind of within my furniture making practice, because the processes I use. So I get satisfaction out of kind of comparing, literally like doing processes where the trade was at maybe 40 or 50 years ago, and then also simultaneously having to stay up to date on where the trade is now. It's really interesting to see how those things compare and contrast as time goes on.
Mm-hmm.
Evan, do you ever think when you're doing your furniture making, like, oh, I could just cut this out really fast on something else, but fight that urge?
I don't fight that urge. I mean, I'll CNC patterns. There's no shame to that. I think it's more, I guess I'm just more interested in how we did it at a certain period in time. I don't even think it's better. So like, no, I don't fight that urge. I mean, there's totally times where it's better to do it in a very modern way. And I'm not trying to like make it romantic or anything. I guess I'm just like, I'm a nerd I like the old machines and how we did things because they're interesting. I don't want us to ever lose any record of how those processes were in the 30s, 40s, so on. I'm just interested in that personally. I don't think that's better or romantic. I'm interested in it myself. So I guess I don't fight that urge too much.
I really like that. I was curious about that too. Like if now that you have access to a CNC, how much of that you've traded off, but.
Totally. Yeah, totally. It's super helpful. Mm-hmm.
And then, so the third
but
part.
At the same time, it's like, no, well, this is totally, I'll cut this short, but this is important to me. I think it's like also knowing what that machine is doing is important for people too, right? I mean, you could technically go get a computer science degree and like be a CNC programmer, right? But if you don't know what that machine is cutting on the other end, like if you've never maybe gone through some of those processes in another, what would now be considered like a archaic or old fashioned way. Yeah. Like cutting a circle with a router versus having the CNC do it. CNC's faster all day long. Of course that wins. But if you don't understand the mechanics of how the cutters are working, which end mills you need to be selecting for the machine, like what is actually happening, not to say for the rest of your life you need to cut the circle with the router, but maybe it's worthwhile like doing that a few times so that you understand what that equipment is doing.
It's a very good point. We try to cross-train any designers or anything like that who would be drawing our parts to know exactly what it's doing. It's super important.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, so the designers have that information too?
We try to, we just try to get them down to the shop, and if they want to design something, we have them cut it and, hey, this is what happened here, because if we want to really come around this corner this way and not have this blow out, we need to go in the reverse direction, change the tool direction, and do all these things, or change tooling. I couldn't imagine designing a car if you've never driven one, something similar to that. Like, it would be so hard to do. So if you've never built a cabinet, it must be hard. I mean, you can take from drawings and stuff like that, but I think a fundamental base knowledge of it is super important. Exactly what you're saying.
Oh, and do you guys, do you have subcontractors for installers, or are your installers like in-house?
Yeah, it's us. It's just us.
Are they cross-trained in the shop as well?
They're either cabinet makers or apprentices. Yeah.
And that's super helpful too, right? Because they're in the shop or vice versa, and they know exactly what's going to happen in the field, or they know what the shop is having to deal with. It's like very relevant.
Yeah. We have a pool of people that we kind of pick from, and it's great to have people who have only worked in shops and people who have only worked on site, and you kind of mix them together. We got a guy who is a home builder for years in the shop, and he knows exactly what a cabinet should look like on the wall. So he's going to get it on the wall exactly how it should look.
Woodcraft Supply knows that woodworking is more than just a hobby. It's your passion. And with Woodcraft's new everyday value, now it's a little more affordable. Woodcraft has lowered the prices on hundreds of essentials that woodworkers use every day, like Bessie clamps, Wood River hand planes, Type-Bond wood glue, dust collection fittings, and more. Check them out online at woodcraft.com or go to one of their 70-plus stores nationwide. It's just another way that since 1928, Woodcraft has been helping you make wood work.
This kind of ties into the last question I have for you guys, which is it possible to run a successful and sustainable production shop where an individual takes a piece from start to finish, or does the work really need to be serialized in order for production to work?
Yeah.
It's hard.
It's hard because I think we never want to put that much pressure on one person. But usually we like to have like a job lead, like, all right, you take control of this one and you're going to see it through start to finish. And if anybody has any questions, we'll point them in your direction, and then you kind of have the oversight of everything. That's what we try to do. We're pretty small. We're only 4 of us in the shop right now, and 2.5 in the office. I guess half being kind of in the shop a little bit too. So it's hard to be like, all right, you're doing this entire, 6 rooms of this house with full millwork by yourself. That would be unbearable. But yeah, I don't think we could. But to be able to break it apart and have other people tackle things makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I agree, I agree with Owen. I think it's not practical in a production setting to do that. But it's no different than anything else, right? I mean, if you look at a nightstand or even some giant commercial interior where there's like 20 sheets of drawings for it, they're not any different. You just have to understand how to think about them, like Owen's saying, in a project management sense. And ultimately that falls on one person, or, I mean, even on huge projects, 2 or 3 people, which in the scheme of things is not even, that's a lot of pressure on those folks. This is like going to be a terrible job paraphrasing this, but there's a great like Phil Lowe quote where he's talking about how to make a masterpiece. And he's basically saying that you're breaking down one large thing into many small components, and you're executing like all of those small portions at a very high level. And then once all of those things end up put together at the end, you end up with the masterpiece. That's a terrible paraphrase. But that's basically what he's saying. And I mean, that in a nutshell is how project management works. So that project manager has to identify, they have to have a clear understanding of the whole project, like Owen's saying. And I mean, that just comes from experience. And then from there, you're able to say, okay, I can break up. These are all the sections I can break up. And then you work at those one at a time. So I agree, like for one to hand one person a packet of drawings and say, here, take it all the way. That's, I mean, yeah, if your number one guy gets it, yeah, he's going to do it, but he's not going to have a good time. The result is not going to be good. The efficiency is going to drop somewhere. And at the end of the day, I mean, to tie this in, I guess, to furniture making, which I think a lot of the readers and listeners, that's how they ended up here. It's no different. I mean, when you take on a large furniture project, by the end of that, you're toast. And that's because you're kind of bearing that all yourself. And so in a employed setting, it's just, it's not the way.
I like that you translate your furniture making approach to the production approach, because it is really like, once I've been overwhelmed with projects and had somebody tell me that it's a bunch of little steps. You just have to do these little steps right to get to the final result. And that made it so much easier to like approach a big project. And so this is the same approach, but just on a much larger scale. And some of it is out of your hands. So
yeah.
It's that old, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time.
for sure.
Gosh. Don't eat elephants. That's all.
Yeah, the only difference is just other people being involved, right? I mean, instead of you saying, I'm going to cut these dovetails today, and that's my only focus, you say, okay, Amanda, you're going to cut the dovetails, and then Evan's going to go over here and edge band or whatever it is. It's just breaking the parts up.
I have a kind of production furniture making question. So say you're doing like, maybe a table and chairs and, a chest for a dining room or something like that. Are you cutting all the legs for all the parts at once and then all the seats for all are you trying to batch it out, or are you working in like chairs, table, chest?
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah.
Batching within type. So like I normally would not take on like all of the pieces at once. I would say, okay, the chairs are going to be the first wave of the project. But within that, yeah, like say there's 20 chairs, all 40 chair posts are going to get milled, cut, trimmed all at the same time. So that way they match. And likewise, I guess if it's in a production setting, so there's multiple people or a larger shop setting, I should say, where there's multiple people involved, it's still going to be the same way. Like Amanda, you're going to start the chairs and do all the milling. Like Evan, you're going to work on the table and like start whatever that looks like, whatever the first process is there. So it's still broken up by in smaller sections.
But you wouldn't just like blanket mill all the stuff, let it rest and kind of go, because I feel like you could get easily confused, but also kind of makes sense to be like, I'm going to glue up for the next week. I'm just gluing tables, I'm gluing chairs, I'm gluing this.
Probably not, because this is into the weeds, I guess, but there starts to be concerns about how long material is sitting and things like that. And I guess actually that's not into the weeds. I guess that's still back to what that other question was about, like one person taking it through versus another person and kind of breaking it into sections, like the foresight to be able to say, if I glue these tabletops up now, they're going to end up sitting for 2 months in the shop and be weird by the time I get back to them. So that's still back to kind of like breaking stuff up and understanding how to go through it most efficiently. And that's hard.
Yeah,
that's hard.
It was a hypothetical, but it's always interested me, just kind of how people go about stuff.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I mean, I've worked in smaller shops, but I'm sure like space is also a factor as well. If you're having a bunch of material set aside, you can't, that's slowing you down on the rest of the processes. There's a lot of like forethought that goes into all of it, I'm sure, like really careful planning.
That makes a lot of sense.
We just did this bedroom project, and it's exactly what you're saying, Amanda. Like we ended up having to wait a little bit to install the stuff. It was like all this wall paneling, like huge, like portions of paneling and like cabinets and stuff. And it took up a lot of space. And it, like, honestly, the delay, which wasn't anyone's fault, but us having to store it, like, it made starting the next project difficult, just because like it was in the way,
Mm-hmm.
You guys probably go through a similar thing from time to time, Owen, I would assume. Like, that's always kind of a balancing act.
Yeah, I would say the exact same thing. It's actually, we have a 10,000 square foot shop, but we also have 5 full 20 by 40 storage units right now that are just full of millwork waiting to go out. So It's like, yeah, those delays can really throw off your, and it's not just the fact of storing it, it's like moving it.
Yeah. Moving.
Even if you're in the shop and you have to like put it in a corner, and then, oh my God, I have to get the door in the corner opens, and then you gotta move. It's just, it can become such a hassle.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Small shop. The first shop I started in was 2-car garage. And if you even brought in like a whole project's worth of lumber, you wouldn't even be able to work.
Right. So yeah, all this strategizing and I'm sure in the scale you guys are working, sometimes it's not just one person. You need 2 people at least to move stuff around, and that becomes, yeah.
It's box trucks and everybody.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, I'm about to order pallets this afternoon to palletize things. You guys know how expensive pallets are if you order pallets? It's ridiculous.
Really? I wouldn't think so.
Yeah, we're all in the wrong business. We should all leave this podcast and go start making and selling pallets.
That's not like a good idea.
That sounds a little mundane. I don't know.
Yeah, there you go.
I wanted to plug a little bit of not plug, but I kind of touched on it earlier, how I relax. It's just like taking a shaving, on my plane, push or pull. I use both. But, we do the community event once a month at our shop. It's Kazurakai, which Andrew's been a big proponent of. He lives not too far from here, so he's always hanging around. But it's really fun. It introduces a lot of new people into it, because I think it's one of those things you'll get hooked really easily if you take one good sharp hand plane shaving, and then you're like, I want to do that more often. So we do like a First Friday meetup where we all take shavings and eat pizza and drink beer and hang out, talk woodworking.
Nice. And that's at Rowan, right?
It's at our shop. Yep.
Perfect. Yeah, I'm planning to come up for that, either the next one or one after. So soon we'll be up there.
Anytime. They're so fun.
Yeah, it sounds like a good time.
It's always good to be the Western hand plane guy there too. Me and Michael Purrier are the 2 guys with our Lee Nielsen planes, being like, yes, all right, we're going to take tin shavings too, even though they don't make any sense to do. We're going to take working shavings and then show you that we can also do thin shavings. But
awesome. Yeah.
I guess I can plug as well, I guess. If anyone wants to learn production woodworking, I've made a lot of like passage doors, like interior and exterior doors. And the end of June at Austin School of Furniture in Austin, Texas, I'm going to teach a door making class there. That involves like a ton of what we've been talking about. So it's a good way to experience that. But also, I guess just generally, like, I talk to people on Instagram sometimes about kind of this topic. And I always, like, some people have seemed frustrated, like they've gone to work in like shops, like as employees and so forth. And they seem frustrated by it because I think it's not what they thought they were getting into, right? Like some of them have made furniture, done like a little bit more glamorous, I guess I'll say, woodworking in the past. And then they get that as a job and they think it'll be similar to that. And it's not. And there's this element of disappointment. But I would encourage anyone, like, even if it's for a year or 6 months, not to say you should go get a job and then burn the company that you work for by leaving so quickly, but see if it's right for you. And even if it's not, like, get that experience, because even when you go back to your furniture making practice or whatever you're doing in woodworking, just, I don't know, the experience of having to work at that level of efficiency and organization, and work with other people, and maybe getting to work with some of those tools that, like, cost $100,000 that you can't just go out and get for your shop, like, that's all good experience. Even if it's not a career path for you, getting a taste of that can be a really good thing and help your practice a lot.
That's a really good point.
We're actually building our apprenticeship program out. We're trying to do it a lot more structured. And, it's funny that you say, like, you might not like it, you might like it, because it is funny. People have this idea in their head what a shop looks like and how it operates. And I think it is a little bit more like working in a machine shop, like engineering style, very tight tolerances. And it can be a little hard to jump right into. But our apprenticeship program we're trying to bridge that and kind of give you the skills up front. But again, like you said, Evan, 6 months, you can't learn nearly enough to be going to another shop or doing like that. So we're kind of working on like a 1 year commitment ish. I don't like commitment, but like with a 3 month non-commitment in the beginning. Like, if in 3 months or anytime in 3 months, you're like, no big deal, it's not for me. We won't feel bad. But once we start putting like the 6-8 year months, like after 1 year, you're going to stop costing us money, and then start hopefully earning some income, because it's nice to teach people, but it takes a lot of time, and it's a lot of, somebody who does have experience is going to have to be around you for a while. People think you can just set the apprentices sanding panels, and it's like, sanding is the most important part. It takes the most training and the most having an eye for exactly the right thing.
And it is possible to not sand correctly and ruin parts.
Yeah. When I was doing my apprenticeship, during my apprenticeship, that was the last thing Phil let me do, was sand stuff. Because that's exactly, you can mess something up, and that's the final step. So it's an interesting.
Yeah, we like to get people into the booth spraying finishes, because then you're seeing exactly what's laying down on top of. You see it before, you see it after, and that's what finished is supposed to look like, and then work backwards from there.
I like that. And so that apprentice program, is that something you can just like apply for online, or?
Yep, you can apply online. It's, we try to not overwhelm ourselves with apprentices. Mm-hmm. So usually it's kind of like a 1 or 2 spot. We're doing we're trying to break it up into like a apprentice 1, apprentice 2, or junior, senior, where it's like, all right, you're building your fundamentals of the shop, being around the shop and working in the shop, and you want to be able to touch every machine. And then level 2 is the techniques. So, the last time I cut, any dental moldings on anything in a crown was forever ago, but it's a skill that you should be taught. And, I just threw dental moldings. It could be anything, but it's going to take you a lot longer. So level 2 or senior apprentice is usually like a longer program before you can even consider saying, I'm a cabinet maker going to a shop, or a mill worker or whatever. Like, I'm already thinking about your door. I'm like, oh, I wonder what he's got for machinery for that door class. How are you going to be cutting spindle molders, something like that, or spindle shapers and those things? It's
ideally, I wanted to do cope and stick with them. They don't have a shaper there, unfortunately. So the door is like a 2-panel, like simple shaker door. So there's just like one lock rail, and we're just going to do no molded. So it's just going to be like a regular mortise and tenon with no profile. But still, I mean, at the same time, the techniques are the same, right? So technically, if you can set up the table saw to run tenons like that, setting up the shaper to run cope and stick, I mean, there's an added element of the profile and getting that to fit, but that's not that much harder. And we're also going to go over a little bit of like if it was a glass door or a side light, it wouldn't be cope and stick necessarily anyway, and the moldings would get applied on after. So I'm going to include that for the class too, just to try and get a little bit more out of that. And I'm going to bring some samples from like some molded doors like that would be done on the shaper too, so folks can see how it's done. And the core of the doors is what I care about a lot, and I think that's where a lot of the quality comes from. So we're going to do a stave core door. So they're going to learn how to make that interior core so that the rails and stiles stay flat with a secondary wood. And then we'll make skins that get resawn. And it's going to be paint grade, so the skins will likely be maple or poplar. But the process would be no different if it was a stain grade door, so they'll learn how to do either. And then we'll go all the way and make a jam for it. I think after that, there's another class after mine where they're going to learn how to basically like hang the door.
Awesome.
So I would be great. I hope some of them come through my class and we make the door and the jam together, and then a week or so, however far out that other class is later, they just go back with their door they made and learn how to put it in an opening. But at the very least, it's a cool skill, right? I mean, that applies to architectural millwork, but I mean, those same things, you can do anything with that. I mean, all the milling and the way you laminate the core and stuff, that applies to high-end furniture as well.
Mm-hmm. That sounds like an awesome class. I like to see, very practical things being taught in furniture schools. North Bennett Street has like a construction program too, or something similar.
They have two programs, or three that involve woodworking, or no, four, I guess, that involve woodworking directly. So cabinet furniture is what I went through. And then there's carpentry, which that's definitely modern carpentry, right? Like framing through finished carpentry. But they also have preservation carpentry, which I think is probably way more similar to what you do, Owen, which is like reproducing moldings, way more like intimate, like high-end serious millwork. And I think they get into that a little bit in carpentry, but PC is definitely like that's what they do. And they do timber frame structures as well. But their wood shop is like dreamy for millwork for sure.
What an amazing
and then
place.
I guess technically violin and piano, I guess they do some woodworking too. But that's like way more specific to what they're doing.
Awesome. Well, I think that's a good point to wrap up on. I appreciate you guys being on, and I'd love to have you back at some point, because I feel like we just touched on on the production shops.
We could go way more into stuff.
It'd be great to do this again. But yeah, thank you guys, and
of course,
till next time.
So Amanda, there's this conversation with Owen and Evan is fantastic, but there's one perspective that I think is super important, and that is the perspective of somebody working in a small production shop, making high-end furniture, such as the very Amanda Russell did for years, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah, and Phil Morley's shop.
Yeah. So, when you're working on something like furniture with Phil, you're in a weird spot where Owen and Evan talk about, hitting the mark regardless. But unfortunately for you, I'm sure that mark was always like way up there.
It really was, yeah.
What's the pressure like to do something monotonous and still like just hit a mark where it's literally nobody knows whether Amanda Russell did it or Philip Morley did it?
That's really tough, and it's all about processes and really getting. The thing I learned was foundationally was dialing in processes. Yeah. And Phil was huge on that. Even if it felt like a waste of time, and maybe waste of time is the wrong phrase for that, but even if it took a lot of time, extra time for him to explain, I'm doing this way for this reason, it was important to learn that. So I even worked with, and I got to see kind of the reasoning behind that. I worked with his mentor, Michael Kolka, for a week one time. And I was sanding some detail, some profile, and he walks over and he goes, "No, you don't fold sandpaper like that. This is how you fold it."
Okay.
He folded into these thirds, and like every single process was so detailed and so specific, but it made processes so much faster and so much more efficient. So I learned to not question those things, and just really like dive into processes.
Yeah.
So I was the person that did the shops on veneer. And once he taught me the way to do it, you do it that way every time and you get good results. And sanding was one of the last things he let me do, actually. I think I mentioned that in the podcast as well. It's like, it's a very monotonous but detailed thing. You have to do it absolutely right.
Yeah, that was surprising to hear. But it made total sense. It was one of those, we'll just, get somebody in here to sand the panels or whatever. And then all of a sudden you realize, no, that's where it could really go wrong.
Yeah, that's the last step. So yeah, it's like hearing Evan's perspective on that too made a lot of sense. It's like the fundamentals of what you learn are just as important as learning more as you progress in skill. Getting that really dialed is so important.
Yeah.
And for me, it made a huge difference.
So, do you think that working in an environment like that is something that most woodworkers would enjoy or loathe?
It was tough for me at times.
Okay.
And I think it takes a specific person.
Yeah.
I'm a person that likes repetitive work. And for a good amount of time enjoyed the pressure of like having to work up to that standard. But at other times it was tricky. Like there were times where I was in the shop by myself and I'm like, what would Phil do in this situation? I really don't know.
Yeah.
And am I doing this right? And yeah, so I think it could be a difficult thing for people, but it worked for me most of the time. Yeah.
I think about so many of our listeners and readers and who just dream of the day of like, going pro or whatever. And a part of me thinks like, I don't know if I got it in me, where I don't know if I could focus that much the whole time. I don't know if I would regret, like hanging the shingle out or whatever and becoming a pro woodworker. For me, it's something that I enjoy because it's mostly something that I just enjoy, so.
Mm-hmm. I think that's important, is finding what the reason why you're doing what you're doing is important.
Yeah.
I think furniture makers doing it full time it takes a lot of drive, and it takes almost a different kind of person to want to do that.
Yeah.
I respect it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that I could do it full time either after working for somebody for years and seeing the whole process. It takes a lot. Yeah.
It seems like something you got to be called to do, I think.
Absolutely.
So.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, thanks, Amanda, for putting this episode together. That's a little bit outside of our box, but if you enjoyed this episode, let us know. Send us in a question or a comment to shoptalk@finewoodworking.com. If you're a member of the Discord, thank you all for the help this episode. And if you're not a member of the Discord, sign up. There's always a link in the bottom. And it's basically just, I always describe it like you're running group text with woodworking buddies. And if you enjoyed this episode, please click that thumbs up button on YouTube. and give us a 5-star review on iTunes if you feel called to do so. Thank you so much for listening. We'll be back in 2 weeks with another episode. Bye.